way if others aren't able to join us, or if they join late, then we'll have the recording on file. So we'll get started in just a moment. Just like to welcome everybody here. I know it's Friday. We have a large group signed up for this presentation, but we will be recording it so that it'll be widely available. Glad that you could join us today. I'm going to start right on in. I'm going to do the first part of our presentation. I'm Frankie Jackson. Thrilled to be here. We're going to be talking about data privacy agreements at the national and Texas state level. So again, thank you for being here. We have three of us that will be presenting. That always makes it nice so that one person's not doing all the talking. I'm going to start out and just talk a little bit about the overall structure of the program for managing data privacy agreements. And then we have Greg and Kyle joining us. They are the real stars of the show because Greg is our Texas Education Technology Leader, Trusted Ed Committee Chair. So he's right in the throes of the details about what we're going to be talking about today. And then we have Kyle that is going to actually be demonstrating and showing what the portal looks like. So those are some exciting things for you to look forward to in today's session. Our agenda is broken up so that we're divided into the three parts of our presentations. So I'll get started now. Just to talk a little bit about why data privacy agreements at the national and Texas state level is important. It's because in short, it's no surprise, we want to secure our ecosystem. We all know that we've got a multitude of systems that we have to deal with. These are some of the primary containers you might think of in terms of student information systems, financial management systems, also learning management, and just a host of instructional student type of applications. So there's no surprise the why as to why this is so important, because there are many applications that we use in our ecosystem, all of which are in this ecosystem transferring data back and forth between the cloud and between each other. And so it's just a lot to manage. So securing this ecosystem from our districts to our home, there's just so many things that we have to do. My screen, there's so many things that we have to address. There's the application vetting, just the contract process, the app management, the integration, and just securing that exchange. And so what is really the quality control features of this data that's being passed back and forth. And then there's the professional learning. And a big component of trusted learning environments, and even in cybersecurity, is making sure that we have creative ways, innovative ways to secure this ecosystem that we're all a part of. And one way to do it is through data privacy agreements. And because applications are used all over the nation, so for example, Zoom, PowerSchool, there's a host of them, Canvas, numerous systems that we all use, it makes sense to address it at the national level, but there's also Texas based systems that we also use just within our state, and individual states have different systems. So one way to do that is to combine all of our efforts together. So we'll talk a little bit about access for learning in that community, and then also the Student Data Privacy Consortium. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So if we look at these two side by side, they've actually been around for some time. This Access for Learning, it actually started as a nonprofit in 1997. And then the Student Data Privacy Consortium really started as a special interest group in 2015. And since that time, it's grown. And one of the things that the consortium does really well, and Greg can attest to this, is that there's a meeting about once a week, a meeting for vendors, a meeting about processes. So it is taken very seriously. There's a lot of work that's being done, all in an effort to get a better handle on our data privacy agreements. So the way that it works is that the Student Data Privacy Consortium works in concert with this Access for Learning, and then we're right in the middle, and all of these organizations really support each other. So we were formerly the Texas K-12 CTO Council. We've had a partnership with the Student Data Privacy Consortium for some time. And that will continue to occur now that we're the Texas Education Technology Leaders, that group. So nothing has really changed just because our name has, and we all support one another. These are the Student Data Privacy Consortium goals, and you can read them yourself, but in a nutshell, it really is about looking to establish a community of stakeholders, and these are the groups of people that work in our ecosystem that are developing effective practice sharing around this whole idea of privacy management. So we're developing tools and resources and somewhat of a clearinghouse, and that's what Kyle is going to be demonstrating in the portal. To really, get our arms around all of the resources that we use and with all of our vendors. So, looking at how we can leverage these partnerships is really what we're focused on today. What you're really wanting to find out is, what are these agreements? How can I use them and reduce the amount of time that it takes to make certain that you have everything in order. So this increased interoperability is really about managing the risk, managing the data sharing and the privacy parameters that are moving back and forth, because this is really where the issue is. So this is really the only community of collaboration that's really addressing both this privacy and this interoperability. So if you don't get anything from today, I think, it would be that there are some tools that you can use to help you. All you really need to do is to have an account to access the tools. And if you're a member of TETL, the Texas Education Technology Leaders Group, then you have automatically membership into this resource registry. So that's a huge bonus for you. So if you're not a member, you certainly want to sign up to be one so that you can have access to all of this. So again, you must have an account. That is the website. If you're a multitasker and you want to go ahead and go there, you can go there now and look at the registry and just really see how robust it really is. So this is, again, just a summary of what all is involved in the consortium. It's the application vetting. It is, kind of a group of oversight that is really looking at the different laws that we have to adhere to for student privacy. And, with the whole goal of looking at all of the contracts and figuring out a way to reduce the number of contracts so that we can piggyback off of one another and save time and resources and hopefully reduce stress, because there is so much stress in all of our work. So with that, these are the goals. We will have a copy of this presentation available in the event you want to share it with your staff. But just know that there's a National Data Privacy Agreement. Greg is going to talk about that and show you some resources of where you can find those. And Kyle was going to show you the actual portal and what that looks like. There's a lot of numbers. If you really look at across the nation, the number of signed vendor agreements, there's probably even more since we've prepared this presentation. 20,000 signed vendor agreements with many different apps and many different school districts. so that it's, supported an estimate of, millions of students that are involved in this protecting students in this consortium. So it's all about data exchange and quality control. And hopefully this is going to help you get started in balancing the protection measures that you need to have in place. And because they're automated, that helps us save time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg because he's going to give you an update. It's not as if some of the information that I've shared with you is new, but Greg has been working tirelessly with his committee on the Trusted Committee to do a lot of great work. So I am going to turn it over to him so that he can share the latest and greatest privacy agreements and talk about anything that's occurred that's new since we gave this presentation. It was probably earlier in the year. I think it was probably in January. So with that, Greg, do you want me to give you, allow you to share your screen so you can take over and share the information that you have?
Yes, if you can go ahead and let me share the screen, I'm going to pull up the.
So I'm going to stop sharing. All right. And you're set up as a co-host, so you should be ready to go. There you go.
Okay, can you see the agreement?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so the what I've got up here is the National Data Privacy Agreement, the Texas version, and I'll get into a little bit later kind of what that means about the Texas version. First, I kind of want to go through what a data privacy agreement is. I don't know the level of everybody watching. I know a number of people have been involved in the process and are familiar, but for anybody who's kind of new to what a data privacy agreement is, and what it isn't, it is an agreement that governs the data that belongs to your district or your organization that is shared with that third party, that vendor. What it is not is it's not a service agreement. So a lot of times vendors will try to push things that belong in a service agreement into the DPA. And that's not what this document is designed to be. It's designed to cover data privacy, and that's it. So it doesn't cover service level agreements. It doesn't cover, contractual obligations. It's just, we're going to be sharing data with you that has personally identifiable information. And these are the responsibilities and agreements that you're going to adhere to have our data shared with you. So it's a very specific document. Sometimes people try to cram a lot of things into it that it's not, but it is designed to be very specific to data privacy. In the past, over the last several years, we have had a Texas state agreement. We came together, I guess about 3, maybe 4 years ago now, when we first started working together. And it's kind of the concept of there's no need to reinvent the wheel. We all have similar needs, similar interactions, mostly with the same core set of vendors. And so the Texas agreement was a way for us to share best practices, to collaborate, to make sure that we were covering everything we needed to cover, and to get some power behind the district side of things. I think I don't remember if it's in the current version of the presentation, but we've had it in the past in the slides, and the national organization A4L mentions it a lot, that 85% of districts in the U.S. are less than 5,000 students. And a lot of those, the CIO or executive director of technology actually has classroom responsibilities. So for a lot of districts, it is very, very hard to get any traction working with a vendor. A lot of times they're given a take it or leave it, and they have no resources to push back on that. So by coming together with that state agreement, it gave us a lot more capital to work together and say, hey, this isn't just McKinney IST, this isn't just Sci-Fair, this isn't whoever. It's this whole organization, this large number of districts in Texas. And so this year we've moved that into the national agreement for kind of the same reasons. So at the national level, besides being just Texas, we have a lot of states that are in that agreement as well. Some very active states, in particular California and Illinois, where they have passed state legislation that requires these to be adhered to, and they've been very active in those states because they're now legally bound to. And so it's kind of the next step where now it's not just, hey, a lot of districts in Texas, it's all these districts nationwide and all these states. And some of the states, like California, they're negotiating the agreements at a state level and then allowing districts to sign on. I think Ohio may be the same way. There's a couple of other states where I think Utah may be the same, where they actually negotiated at the state level. So it gives the ability to come to the table at more of a level playing field with those large vendors, in particular, your Googles and Microsofts and Adobes of the world, who a single district, no matter how big, whether it's a Dallas ISD or a Houston ISD, that's not big enough to really get any traction on making them move on a DPA. Whereas with the multi-state consortium, there are conversations going on, and those conversations are starting to get some traction on some of those large vendors that individually we would never have a chance of getting anything to move on. And as Frankie mentioned, we do meet, the state reps meet every 2 weeks. We compare notes, see where there are issues, where there are common problems. Sometimes if a particular state or area is having an issue, other states will jump onto the call with the vendor just for support. So one thing that everyone in Texas can do to help is if you're running into any issues with a particular vendor or with a particular issue, if you pass those on either to Frankie or myself, and we can put those up and compare and see if other states are having the same issues, or sometimes if other states have already been able to solve that issue. On a couple of the calls, it's been discovered that something that a vendor is pushing it back on in one state, they've already signed off on another state. And sometimes it's because they have multiple law firms or multiple lawyers at a firm, and the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. And so if you run into any of those issues, if you can pass those up, that we can consolidate those and help to get some traction on that. So with that kind of as background, I want to go through kind of quickly just what the components of the data privacy agreement are and the basic operation of filling one out. So it's a fillable PDF. Some of the fields were designed to populate other fields. So you'll notice, so LEA is going to be the school district. The provider is going to be whoever's providing the service. But there are some fields which will auto-populate. So it was designed to try to make it as easy as possible to fill out. The idea is that the data privacy agreement is a needed protection for the district. It is not, however, something that's adding anything directly to instruction. And so you want to be able to spend as little time as possible on it while still covering yourself and getting the protection you need. So you've got your basic information on who's parties to the agreement, whether there's an Exhibit H and an Exhibit E, and I'll get to those in a little bit when we get to the end in more detail. Exhibit G is the Texas-specific terms for the national agreement. So the first part we're going to go through is the standard national agreement, and that'll be the same whether it's the one used in California, in Ohio, in Illinois. It doesn't matter what state is using the national agreement. These initial terms are going to all be the same. When you get to Exhibit G, that's where the state-specific additions or modifications are added, and we'll go over those. So the first part we'll go through very quickly, just the contact information for both parties. And you go through a number of common articles on the national agreement. So it defines the purpose and scope. And you get into Article 2, data ownership and authorized access. So that this lays out what the rights are, that the data is owned by the LEA, covers parent access, covers law enforcement requests. Subprocessors are going to be the basically subcontractors or affiliates or other companies that a vendor may use. So if a company is having their site hosted on Amazon Web Services, for instance, then AWS would be a subprocessor for the company you're signing the agreement with. The Article 3 goes through the duties of the LEA, basically what the responsibilities are for the school district and doing compliance. And then Article 4 gets into the duties of the provider. So what they need to do to be in compliance on privacy, defines authorized use, the obligations with their employees, disclosure requirements, covers de-identified data, disposition of data once an agreement is terminated, covers advertising limitations. I can't remember where I heard it, but one of my favorite cybersecurity quotes is roses are red, violets are blue. If the product is free, the product is you. So advertising these days is a huge business. Google is not actually free, but they are selling you. And so when it comes to our students, those limitations around what advertising can be done and what they can subject our students to is covered there. When you get to Article 5, data provisions, that covers things like storage, audits, what they adhere to on data security. And when we get to Exhibit F, which is mentioned there at the end, I'll go into a little more detail about what I really like about the way it's done in the national agreement over the way we did it in the Texas agreement, that I think is a little bit easier to maintain and cleaner. It covers the responsibility in a data breach. So this is where you get into a lot of the nuts and bolts of we're in an environment where no matter how careful you are, no matter how many precautions you take, you're only one end user making a poor decision away from having an incident. And it's no longer a matter of if, but a matter of when and how you're going to respond to it. So having the requirements for the vendor spelled out in terms of a data breach is important. When you get to Article 6, that's the general offer of terms. I'll go into that a little bit more when we get to Exhibit E. Article 7, just miscellaneous, talks about termination, priority of agreements, basically all your legalese, does bound their successors. So I'm sure everybody is shocked, but sometimes educational software companies sell themselves to other companies who then sell themselves to other companies who then you can never remember what the name was 5 years ago. So it covers those scenarios. When you get to the exhibits, this is where the vendor is going to start to put the details down of what they are providing. So Exhibit A is just a description of their services. So an elementary math program that's designed to reinforce core math problems, whatever that may look like. When you get to Exhibit B, this is the real nuts and the bolts of what are they collecting as far as data. So there's a couple of different kinds of data that they could potentially have. Some of it's going to be the things that you would send as roster data. So your student names, staff names, maybe parent names. You might have information like, are they ELL? Do they have any 504 accommodations? And that's data you're sharing with them. But this also covers things like, do they use cookies? Do they collect IP addresses? What other kind of information do they collect as far as in the use of the program, as well as then the data you're sharing with them. So it just goes through, allows them to specify exactly what data do they have, so that you'll have a record of that. And on the the site, when Cal shows you that in a little bit, there's actually a place where you can make that visible for your staff, your parents, your community to see on any particular program what data is shared with or collected by that program. Exhibit C is simply the definitions that define what's used throughout the agreement. Exhibit D, this is an example directive for disposition of data. This is not a requirement. It's just an example to show the process that would be used upon termination of agreement and how one way to process that to adhere to the requirements they've agreed to previously, but this form would not have to be used. It's just an example. When you get to Exhibit E, this is where really one of the most powerful features of this particular DPA is. So Exhibit E is a general offer of terms. And what it allows the vendor to do is to basically pre-approve any other district to sign on to this agreement without having to go through the process. So if McKinney, for instance, if we signed an agreement with the vendor and they signed Exhibit E, then any other state, any other district in the state of Texas that's a member of TETL and has access to the Student Data Privacy Consortium site would be able to then simply sign on to the agreement, submit it to the company, and they're done. So instead of having to find a contact at the company, say, hey, we need you to sign this agreement, get it all filled out, go back and forth, simply it becomes literally a 30-second process to say, oh, hey, I'm looking for vendor X. They already have an agreement with McKinney. Let me just sign on, submit it, and we're done. So literally it becomes a 30-second DPA agreement at that point. What happens if they fill it out is they are going to reference the originating district, the date of that agreement, who they are as the provider. So this is the information they fill out. What they do not fill out at that time is subscribing LEA. This would be where you would put your information if you're going to attach yourself to the Exhibit E. So if McKinney had an agreement with a company and then say Sci-Fair wanted to add on, they would put their information here for the school district, the representative, sign that, send it to the vendor, and then they're done. They're on that agreement with all the same terms and conditions. Exhibit F is the data security requirements. In the Texas agreement, we had kind of some best practices we collected to try to make sure that the vendors were adhering to good data security practices. The problem is things are changing so quickly, it's very hard to keep up with what's the latest best practices, how are things changing. So what's in the national agreement is actually referencing a number of the most common frameworks. Most people at this point are trying to align themselves with the framework, and those are updated continuously. So rather than us trying to maintain our own list, there again, it's that concept of, we don't have time or resources to reinvent the wheel. So they can either specify which framework they're adhering to, NIST being one of the most common. The actual Texas framework that we have to adhere to is based off a subset of NIST. If they do something different, they can in Exhibit H specify what that is and how they feel they meet compliance. But for most of them, they will adhere to one of these common frameworks, and that keeps us out of the business of trying to keep those updated. Exhibit G is the state-specific terms. So this is where it gets different for each state from the core national agreement. So this is the supplemental terms for Texas. One thing that we've all the way back early on in the agreement felt strongly about is that we want to protect not just student data, but we want to protect all of our data. So if we're sending staff information, if we send parent information because there's parent accounts, we want that same level of protection for all of the data that we share, not just for student data. So obviously student data is important, but the concern there is, that all of our data is important. Specifically call out compliance with Texas privacy laws and regulations. So it covers Texas Education Code, Chapter 32, Texas Government Code, Chapter 560, and then all Texas laws and regulations pertaining to LEA data privacy and confidentiality. That's to cover. It's kind of a fluid situation right now. There's a lot of state level laws either being passed or being discussed each session. And so wanted to make sure that we left that you're going to adhere to whatever comes as far as laws as well. There's a modification to how they define for FERPA. There's some additions on the requirements under data breach. Where it refers to, again, the Texas law, and also gives the ability to terminate a service agreement if there's a material breach of the terms of the DPA, and to spell out specifically that the provider's obligations survive termination of the DPA and service agreement until all data has been returned or securely destroyed. So if they have a material breach of the DPA, the district can terminate the agreement, but that doesn't absolve them from still adhering to what they need to do as far as data disposition and taking care of that breach. Section 5 just removes service agreement as a requirement of the entire agreement. And that's because, in particular, a lot of the districts in Texas that contributed to this had some issues with free sites where you still want a DPA if they're going to have any data about your users or your students. But on those free sites, there's not necessarily a specific service agreement to reference. And we wanted to cover for that scenario. Reimbursement of expenses associated with security breach. The national agreement didn't call out any sort of requirements on a financial amendment. And so that was added in. And then I'll get to Exhibit H here in a minute, which is district-specific modifications. But it specifically calls out that you cannot have an Exhibit E if there's any modifications to the agreement. So the reason for that is that we do not want anybody to sign an agreement, have modifications, throw an Exhibit E out there, a district to come looking, saying, oh, there's an Exhibit E, let me sign on, submit that, not realizing that they'd actually agreed to non-standard clauses in that agreement. So we don't want anybody to get caught by surprise over what they're submitting. We want them to know if they submit Exhibit E, they know exactly what's in that agreement and what's being covered. Exhibit H is for the option of if there's modifications that need to be made with a vendor or district specific, those can be entered here. So instead of redlining a particular section, so instead of coming up, and striking through something or adding something within the agreement itself, this makes it very obvious. So you can see how we did it for the state. This is what was there. We struck through it, and then this is what's replacing that verbiage. So it would be the same thing for any district level modifications. Those would go into Exhibit H, so that if anybody is looking at that agreement that's posted online, it's very clear what was changed, what is different from the national agreement, so that there again, it's very transparent. There's no changes that are buried in a paragraph of text that nobody notices that it got changed. But that is where if anything is added in Exhibit H, then Exhibit E is not allowed, because Exhibit E would be for just the standard agreement, and a district signing that should know that they're getting the standard agreement without having to go search for other modifications. So that is the very, very quick version of the data privacy agreement. I will mention, if you have not looked at the national agreement, but you're familiar with the state agreement, when we were going through developing the Exhibit G, we did create this document that has the comparison of the Texas DPA, the last version we had, and the national DPA, which spells out for each section, item by item, exactly what each one looks like, so you can see exactly how they compare. So if you're familiar with the Texas agreement and you want to see how that national agreement matches up, put your information in the chat or email me, and I can share that document out with you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kyle to go through the Sdpc site and how to upload and process an agreement.
While we're making that transition, I'll just say thank you, Greg. I mean, this is an enormous responsibility, and you already have a full-time position with McKinney ISD, and that's a huge job in of itself. So thank you very much. Greg is just a wealth of information, so feel free to keep the chat going and ask questions. When we turn it over to Kyle, then Greg can probably respond to any questions that you may have. So thank you, Greg, very much, and welcome, Kyle.
Thanks, Frankie. All right, so my piece in this is to show you all the Sdpc resource registry. So it's important to know that the DPA itself, the new national DPA, that's the thing that Greg was just showing you, that is actually freely available on the TETL website. What is free with your membership is what I'm getting ready to show you here, the Sdpc resource registry. So if you are a member of TETL, you can request an account to get logged onto this if you don't have one already. I believe those requests go to Alice, but that's where you'll from TETL you'll get that login information. So I just pulled it up so y'all can see. It's just really simple. You log in, and this has really been designed, frankly, to be a whole workflow process for you. I will tell you, here at Lackland ISD, we don't really necessarily use some of the workflow pieces. We have our own internal ITSM solution with a workflow built into it so that we can make sure we're crossing all of our internal T's and dotting all of our internal I's. But if you don't have an ITSM, don't know what an ITSM is, don't want to know what an ITSM is, you can do a lot of this stuff right here in the Sdpc resource registry itself. So why this is beneficial to you is because this allows you, Greg talked earlier about that Exhibit E. And again, if a vendor signs that Exhibit E, all your work is basically done for you. All you got to do is go on to the resource registry, find a district that signed the Exhibit E, or excuse me, find a district that posted a signed Exhibit E, because Exhibit E is signed by the vendor. Then you're going to sign, your district is going to sign at the bottom of that portion, send an email back to the vendor with that Exhibit E attached, and you're done. So if there's already an Exhibit E out there, it makes your life a lot easier. And what we did here at Lackland ISD is we just ran the national DPA through our legal folks here. And so the idea is that if the vendor was signing an unaltered national DPA, there was no additional review on their part necessary. So we kind of pre-reviewed the agreement. So legal reviewed a blank agreement and said, yes, if the vendor is signing this unaltered, we're good, you can move on. The only time that we actually kick this back to our legal team is if there's some sort of a requested modification. I will say that a lot of work went into on the part of school districts, on the part of vendors. Vendors were a part of the process in crafting the national DPA. And so we are seeing far less vendors who are asking us for a modification on the national DPA than we saw on the state level agreement. So that those modification requests are fewer on the national agreement, particularly when we take the opportunity to explain to vendors, hey, we had vendors involved with this process, and then that seems to lower their apprehensions quite a bit. So when you get logged in, you do have the option to search the national database. Frankly, because of that Exhibit G with those state-specific terms, you're going to want to look for a district that in the state of Texas that has already signed. So that's pretty easy. from the drop down right on the home page after you log in, you just pick Texas, you hit Visit Alliance, and that's going to take you to our local Texas Student Privacy Alliance, right? Once you're on that home page, this search the database. It's in the boxes in exactly the same spot, but when you click Start Exploring here, what you're going to get instead are those agreements that have been signed in Texas. Now, keep in mind that because we're transitioning to this new national agreement, you're going to see agreements in the database that were the older Texas DPA, and you're going to see agreements that are the newer national DPA. So just be aware of that. And if you're jumping into this brand new, you want to make sure that your legal team understands what the Texas agreement says versus the new national agreement with the Texas exhibit. So you can search the agreements that are already in the database by a whole bunch of different ways. You can search for agreements that were signed by a district. Cypress Fairbanks initiated a lot of these agreements. We, Lackland ISD, initiated a lot of these agreements. Greg and McKinney ISD obviously have initiated a lot of agreements. So if you know districts who have been very involved with this program from the get-go, you're going to find a lot of agreements just by finding them in the list and clicking on their name and hitting search, and you're going to see all the agreements that are there. So this is, the first column shows you the name of the particular piece of software that was requested. The second column is going to show you what the status of that particular piece of software was. And then if there was an agreement that was signed, that's going to be in this third column. Important to note that these DPAs do have expiration dates, so they do have to be re-signed periodically. So if you're going to leverage an Exhibit E from another district, you want to be sure to know when that original agreement expires so that you can make sure that they have renewed that agreement or sign one of your own with that particular vendor. Grade level just shows you what grade levels it was approved for. Content area is what content areas it was approved for. And then this little data, if you click on the little hourglass, you can get some idea of what the data elements are that that particular vendor is actually collecting. So as we look through this list here, you'll see a piece of software called A Day with a Difference. We approved it because it collected no data. And so that's an important thing to note as well. Sometimes you're dealing with a particular software package that doesn't collect data. It's important, though, for you to understand the nuance around this, though, because you could envision, for example, an online free writing app, and they say, well, no, we don't really collect any data. But then a student goes and maybe they're talking about a medical problem that they've been struggling with for a very long time. Well, now all of a sudden you have some very confidential information in a platform that maybe you didn't think data collection was necessary for, right? So keep in mind what are students actually entering onto that platform so you can determine, is it truly a no data collected type of scenario? You will run into particular vendors who will not sign agreements. And what is great about this database is that school districts will put it out there. They'll enter it in for everybody to see. You know, if you're not going to sign an agreement with us, fine. We're going to make everyone aware why. So you'll see Adobe Spark was not approved, and the notes on it: Adobe Spark cannot sign any privacy agreements or policies, as Adobe Spark is a general audience product. So there you go. Again, districts have been very good about putting in their attempts to get vendors to sign and what the reactions of vendors were. And I think that's good, because I think that'll, alluding to what Greg was saying or sharing earlier, that's going to encourage those vendors to think twice about, no, we don't sign any agreements, right? You'll see the agreements when it says Tech Spa like this, that is the Texas, that's the former Texas agreement. If it says no exhibit in parentheses, what that means is that vendor did not sign an Exhibit E for whatever reason. So it suggests to you that you can probably get them to sign an agreement with you too, but there's no Exhibit E that you can tag on or piggyback on. And what we're doing when we reach out to these vendors and we're trying to get them to sign these agreements is we have that conversation with the vendor. Like if I see that they aren't signing an Exhibit E, sometimes I'll pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, I just want to make you aware of what's going on here. This is going to make your life a heck of a lot easier if you sign this Exhibit E, because it's once and done for the state of Texas, and you don't have to sign any more of these. So usually we're fairly successful in getting them to sign those, but that's what that looks like. If you come down, there are certain vendors who are just, we're not going to sign that agreement the way it is. We need some sort of modification. If that's the case, those agreements are entered into the database as a vendor-specific agreement. And it's important to note that you can have a vendor-specific agreement that still allows for an Exhibit E. They could, in theory, do that, but we have written that that Exhibit G, that new state addendum. Remember that last point that Greg was showing you says you can't have an Exhibit E with any alteration on the national agreement or the state addendum, right? So if the vendor is wanting to change anything about the national agreement or the state addendum to it, that can no longer be represented as the national DPA, because that's what that last bullet on Exhibit G says. So if you're going to do that, if you're going to make some modifications, remember that's now that is now a vendor specific agreement, right? If there is an agreement from a vendor that has an Exhibit E, you can just click on it. It's going to open up that PDF. You'll be able to see there's where they signed it. And then this happens to be a TEXPA agreement, but your district would fill out the bottom portion, send it back to the vendor, and you're now covered under the agreement. You're piggybacking off of it. So how do we get agreements in here? Notice up at the top that there is a distinction that's being made between agreements and resources. So a resource is a particular piece of software that you might want to use, right? So for example, Air Squirrel's Ditto, that would be a resource. And then the agreement is the DPA that you sign between them. It's pretty unlikely that you're ever going to need to add a resource, because odds are someone else in the state or in the country has already added that particular piece of software. But if you need to, from the resources menu, you can click and just hit add new resources, and right away you can get in and add a new resource. But again, highly unlikely. Virtually every piece of software is already going to be entered into the platform. To see your district's agreements, you can click under here and you click Manage Agreements. That's going to give you a list of all of the agreements that your district has put through this process, right? So all of those are there. There are even spots in these records for you to include the contact info for particular salespeople who maybe helped you with that process, right? So that's all in there. The other thing that you can do from this menu is you can add a new agreement. And so when we go there, the first question you're going to get asked is there a signed contract in place? So this is what Greg was alluding to earlier when he was talking about that service agreement. If you have a service agreement, you can say, yes, we have a signed contract, and it's going to take you to the menu of choices for you to enter in what type of a DPA you have. You'll notice down at the bottom, we have the TEXPA agreements. There are still districts out there who are signing this because they have not, perhaps they've not had an opportunity to do a legal review of the new national agreement or whatever the case may happen to be, but those are still down there. And then up at the top, we have the new national agreement. So if you're signing the agreement with someone and they are not signing Exhibit E, you're going to pick this top choice. If you're signing the new national agreement and they have signed Exhibit E, that's with Exhibit. And This language here, originating LEA, what that means is that you were the district that signed the agreement complete with Exhibit E with that particular vendor. If you are piggybacking on an Exhibit E that was signed from another district, then you're going to pick this last option, National Standard Agreement with Exhibit, and then you'll just attach that signed Exhibit E. Again, these are options over here on the right in the green box if you have a vendor that for whatever reason is being particular and does not want to sign the national agreement, has some modifications that need to be made, whatever the case may happen to be, right? So those are available to you over here. So it's pretty simple. You click on whatever the choice might happen to be for your particular agreement. You're taken to a page to fill out additional information. This first option is pre-populated based upon what you picked on the previous screen. You'll see this. This is what you're picking for the new national agreement. I don't want you all to be confused about this. Yes, it says Texas. That's because, remember, we have that state-specific Exhibit G, but that Ndpa, that N is for national. So this is the first version of the new national agreement, right? So I'm picking that. I'm going to get a big, long list of resources that I can pick from to say what this is. I can enter in the date it was approved. Remember, the date it was approved is the date that the last person signed the agreement. And that's the date that goes in here. The date that it expires under the new national agreement, it's a flat 3 years from the date it was signed. So this date should be exactly 3 years after this date. If they sign an Exhibit E on the new national agreement, there is now a requirement for the vendor to provide an email address to which those signed Exhibit E's will go. And so this is the email address of where those signed Exhibit E's are going to go. So that's what gets put in there. The signed agreement file, this is the actual PDF file of what you signed with that particular vendor. You click that and you can upload it right there. So the status of the agreement is going to be active if you've actually signed the agreement and everything's fine. You'll notice that there's also the option to do, we approved it, there's no data collected, a declined, we did not pursue it, so on and so forth. You can see there's a lot of different options in here to help you all track your individual workflows. Agreement restrictions, if there are any, and then check the grades that this applies to, the particular content areas, and so on and so forth. And then you're off to the races in terms of getting that out onto the website. Last thing I want to show you is tools. There's a couple of options here for your own records. You can export the stuff that's in the Sdpc resource registry. This is your stuff. You can export it to an Excel file. You can also do a customized resource listing. What that is that's actually a web page. That's this link right down here in step 3. You can put that link onto your website, and then your teachers can actually go to that link and see what apps have been approved by your district. Last thing, account management. You can manage the district users that have access to it right there, and you can add a new user by clicking on the link right there. And that's just quick and dirty overview of the resource registry. And then I think the 3 of us are happy to entertain questions.
I've got 2 questions that are in the chat I want to cover first, and then we'll see if there's any additional ones. The first one was, there was a question, any recommended press, sorry, when you stop sharing, my chat window jumped to a different screen. Okay, are there recommended processes or standards on how to get the Ndpa to vendors you already work with that have access to student information? Would we need to get legal team involved? So a lot of districts will choose to make that a process as they come through a renewal. You can go through and you can request it in the middle of an agreement, although you have less leverage. But you can certainly make it known that, hey, we've got another 18 months left in our agreement, or we need to get this DPA assigned. You know, if they say they're not willing to sign it, you can let them know that that'll be a deal breaker for, and you'll look for somebody different when it comes up for renewal. But you obviously have less leverage if you're already in the middle of a contract with them. So it's kind of up to you. You know, if the depending on the district, if the vendor's wanting to make changes to the agreement, you know, some districts would want to get legal involved. Some districts, including ours, it depends on the degree of the change, whether we would vet it or say, okay, that's minor enough that, you know, we feel it doesn't need to go to legal. Obviously, if you were to try to use the refusing to sign a DPA to break an existing contract, you would want to have legal involved in that conversation. But I haven't really seen any districts that have gone that route. Usually it's, you know, most of them will sign it anyway in the middle of an agreement. And if not, then, you know, you can apply that pressure when the agreement comes up for renewal. The second question was asking if you need a login to see this information for a district. Reason I ask, we post this info for all staff to see what applications are already approved to purchase and use. And you need a login to be able to add an agreement. I'm going to actually share my screen out again real quick and show you. This is the Sci-Fair page. There is a public page when you've added resources in. And so the public page does not require a login. So if you're going to request a resource or approve and upload an agreement, that would require a login. But you can, and Cal showed this a little bit earlier, where you could copy that link. But this is what it looks like. I chose Sci-Fair because they've got a ton of entries, so it's a good example. But it'll show what's approved, what's not approved, the reason if it was not approved. If there's an agreement, you can click on and actually see the agreement itself. And where Kyle was showing you to fill out, you can fill out grades and the information collected. If you enter that, then it'll actually even show you here, you know, what data is being collected for, you know, each individual program. That's where you can see that there's the grade area, grade levels and content areas. These are going to be the collected data. So all of that's there, including approved date, expired dates. So all of that could be shared with your teachers, with your parents, with your community, without requiring a login. Are there any other questions?
Now's a great time to ask those questions because we have some real experts here. So thank you, Greg, and thank you, Kyle. Are there any other questions? Let's check our time. We're already getting some requests come in for IDs, so we appreciate that. Anyone else? Well, we hope this information's been informative. Greg gives an update during our member calls, so that's a great time to also tune in and find out the latest about whatever's going on in our with our Texas education technology leaders. So we appreciate you being here, and the recording's going to be available in case there's something detailed that you may have missed or may want to go back and reference. So thank you very much. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great Friday and a great weekend. Bye.